Our next speaker, most of us know Andy very well, and I'm delighted that he's very generous with his time in order to help us understand all the ins and outs of Colorado River water and what we can do and what options there are. As many of you know, Andy Mueller is the general manager for the Colorado River District. Took over for Eric Cruz, who was there for a long time. Andy has set and his board has set a new vision for where the Colorado River District is heading. I'm sure different from what Eric was doing, but Andy's an attorney. He practiced law for many years in Uray, so he's a local guy. Before moving to Glenwood Springs, and about 4 years ago, his legal work took him to across the breadth of Western Colorado, water, land use, and economic issues for 9 years, from 2006 to 2015. He was the director of the Colorado River District Board, so he actually was a board member and then was hired to be the general manager. His combined water experience and has prepared him to lead the River District. If you've been to any of his presentations before, his knowledge is broad, his experience is deep, so we have, not for a pun, wide and deep, but anyway, we're delighted to have him. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Colorado River District Board, it encompasses directors from across the Western Slope, and the whole point of the Colorado River District is to protect West Slope water. So I don't know if I made that oversimplified, but that's what we're all here for, and that's what we're concerned about. So please help me welcome Andy Mueller to the stage.
Before I put you to sleep, I was going to run a little video that might help explain what the River District does and where we stand in other West Slope water districts.
On Colorado's western slope, water is everything. From the high top of the Rocky Mountains to the Grand Valley and beyond, these waters shape our history. They form the backbone of our rural economies, and they have sustained generations of hard-working families. Since 1937, the Colorado River District has been safeguarding western slope water for agriculture, for recreation, for industry, and for the environment.
We were formed 82 years ago to give voice and protection to the needs of the river and the people and the communities that depend on it.
We run a cow-calf operation for the ranch, and we supplement our income through running a fly fishing guided outfit. The water is what matters to all of us and what we all need. The river is in a tug-of-war state between consumptive use and non-consumptive needs. For irrigation diversion projects associated with agriculture, we need cool, clean water. Trout fishermen downstream needs cool, clean water. The River District acts as a great intermediary between all of those needs. The river is what binds us all.
Whether you're a rancher in Moffett County or a voter in Summit County, you depend upon the Colorado River. And getting people to recognize this common interest and the leverage we have when we speak with one voice is what the Colorado River District does.
People just don't realize how valuable the River District is. By bringing us together, we all of a sudden understood this was our river, and what was good for one of us was good for both of us. It's an opportunity that the West Slope has to have a strong voice, and if the people of the West Slope don't recognize that, the Colorado River and all its tributaries that we love and what brought us here is going to go away too. We're either in it together or we're going down one at a time.
You take the environmental needs for the river and you realize what's important for the environment. Those same exact things are important for ag. They're important for industry and they're very important for recreation.
10% of our gross domestic product is outdoor recreation. People that like the Colorado Rivers also like to eat Palisade beaches and live here. The River District's doing a great job changing the framework to be one of collaboration On the West Slope, water is the lifeblood of this community. Our water and our ability to serve agricultural producers and industrial consumers, the municipalities, we all depend on having water in the river, and no one wants to see a dry river. Without water, you take that out of the picture, you have nothing.
Without the river district, the West Slope would be a very different place. We'd have less water in our rivers, we'd have less agriculture, less of an economic engine that is recreation.
I can't survive as an ag business if I don't have my water. The role of the river district is to work with entities around our basin in a cohesive way to accomplish the local goals as well as the Western Colorado goals as far as protecting our natural resource and making sure that water is used correctly.
The river district has managed over the years to fight the Front Range and the Trans Mountain Diverters. We're able to bring a voice to the table and present that united front that is so important to keeping water in our rivers flowing westward.
The next generation is here. My grandsons are growing up here. We've got to make sure that they have the same chance that my daughter did, who's now here, and that I had from my dad. The whole West Slope to me is a natural resource-based economy, and water is the number one in that natural resource. And how do we manage that so that the next generation has the same joy that we have?
For more than 80 years, one entity has been working to keep West Slope water on the western slope. These are your rivers. This is your water. And this is your Colorado River District.
Thank you. I was a little worried when Sue started introducing me that I was going to have to talk about the snowpack. And if I look at the agenda, it said that the gentleman from the Weather Service is up next. So I appreciate that I don't have to do that because I'm probably not the best person. I actually want to see if we can get my PowerPoint key up. No. Oh, I think it is. Sorry. I'm sorry. I thought it was still video. Appreciate that. We put that video together mainly because we have so many questions about what the River District is, how is it different than the Colorado Water Conservation Board, how is it different than every other water entity that you hear about. And I think what's important to realize for those of us on the West Slope is that, back in 1937, folks from Montrose County, Mesa County, Moffett County, Grant County, Garfield came together and said, we're really concerned. We're seeing trans-basin diversions heading over to the east. And we realized up in Gunnison County that they were already out there surveying trans-basin diversions out of the Gunnison River. And they said, we've got to get together and speak with one voice. And I think it's really critical, maybe more so if you look at what's going on in Washington right now, that we keep water nonpartisan, right? On the West Slope, it's not about what party you're in. It's about making sure that our system over here on the West Slope works for our communities and provides water for all of our needs, all of our consumptive needs, all of our non-consumptive needs. We've got to recognize that in order to keep a healthy agricultural economy, we also have to keep healthy rivers. And so how do we do that together? And we're not always going to agree, but if we can agree to talk politely and civilly together, I think we can find solutions that work. And it really is important as we go into a period where there's, again, a lot of conflict, some concerns, some legitimate concern about what the population growth in the Front Range is going to do to our water resources. There's concern about the amazing population growth down in Arizona and California and what that's going to do to our water resources and our water availability. That we here continue to work through the issues that we have in a way that results in the greatest benefit to our entire community in the West Slope. As Sue alluded, we have a board member from each of our 15 counties, including Montrose County. Your county commissioners have appointed Mark Catman as our board member, you might be surprised to learn, is a very vocal member on our board, and does a great job representing Montrose County. We have a great board. As Sue mentioned, I had, for 9 years, represented Uray County on the board, and then had stepped off the board for several years as I had moved up to Glenwood Springs to change things around with my law practice. We have a great board. It exerts, I think, what all of us admire, which is local control. We have some great leaders in that, and they really help us direct our staff. We have a staff of about 21 members. They consist of primarily a lot of engineers, water resource specialists, a few lawyers, and a few lobbyists. So those are the sorted types that we have to keep around to keep our power. But we have, and some fantastic administrative folks as well as some accounting and others. It is something that we do, and I want to thank everybody here because we are funded through a mill levy. It's on your tax bill. It's probably one of the lowest tax bills. It's under a quarter of a mil. But I do want to let you know that we appreciate that. We recognize that it is your money that lets us operate this government, and we work for you. I encourage you to reach out to us if you have concerns or questions about our policies that we take, actions that you think we need to take, or frankly, if you have concerns about how we're spending your money. I welcome that discussion because we recognize that we have a certain position of public trust that we have to honor. I want to talk a little bit. I think Amy covered a lot of this, but I sometimes graphics help, and I think filling in some issues just to help people understand what's driving the current crisis. Why are we talking about demand management? Just to be clear, when we talk about demand management, what we're talking about is intentionally reducing our consumptive use of water. So if you're an ag, where 80% of our water is used in the state, we're talking about reducing the amount of water you consume. So it's not the amount of water you divert out of the river, but it's the amount of water you actually consume growing your crops. If you're a city, we're talking about instituting drought restrictions when you wouldn't normally have them, right? If you're in industry, we're talking about reducing your water use. We're seeing, frankly, a lot of that right now in many ways that may damage our economy through the closure of coal plants, where they are actually reducing their economic production in the West Slope. We see it down in Nucla and Natarita, and that actually is a potentially good thing for the river. It's a really awful thing for those communities. How do we recognize that losing that water is something that will economically affect the county or the cities, and how do we help those communities through that? And I think it's really important for all of us. So if we look at this, back in 1922, as Amy mentioned, the lower basin got 7.5 million acre feet. And they get the first 7.5 million acre feet. So it's important to recognize that. The upper basin then got 7.5 million acre feet. And later, in the 1922 compact, they said, hey, we're going to agree at some point with Mexico that they get some water. In 1944, we did agree with Mexico that they get 1.5 million acre feet. But then the 22 compact gives the lower basin another 1 million acre feet. So really they have 8.5 million acre feet under the compact. And so that total is about 17.5 million acre feet on paper. Where's the river actually being used today? 7.5 million. They use it every year in out of their primary right on the river. They are doing a little bit of storage, and I'll get to that here in a minute. But I don't think they've ever gone below 7.5 million acre feet, and it's important to understand that. We, in the upper basin, have never used more than about 4 to 4.5 million acre feet. So we're not using anywhere near our paper entitlement on the river. And it's important to remember that. Down in the lower basin, what else are they using? Well, they're using 1 to 1.5 million acre feet on reservoir evaporation and transit loss when they deliver the water. They don't account for that, and that's really one of the major sticking points on the administration of the river is they don't think that they have to account for it. They think that the Supreme Court in the Arizona v. California case said that they didn't have to worry about it. Our argument there is that really that that lawsuit was not interpreting the compact, it was interpreting an act that was passed in the 50s, or in the 30s, excuse me. The tributaries, out of the tributaries, the Gila and the Salt, they're using another 2 to 2.5 million acre feet down there. So Mexico's using its 1.5 million acre feet. And the reason I've divided it up on this slide is that there's some language in the compact that says during times of shortage, we have to provide half of that. So there's an argument about what shortage is, and we can get a bunch of lawyers in the room and no one will agree, but that's the issue. So what's the total actual use on the river? 16 to 17.5 million acre feet, without the upper basin ever coming close to its paper allotment. Well, what's really available on the river, and I think this is a critical issue, and I apologize right now for the graph, but I'm going to try to explain it as easily as I can. So on the bottom here, this is 1875, and going up is the amount of million acre feet in the natural flow of the river. Okay, and remember, this is reconstructed data because there's not a natural river anymore. We're all taking water out of it. But this is hydrologist's best guess. So 1875 here, 2018 over here. So you can see that orange line is the running average to date. And it barely gets above 15 million acre feet. That's what that is right there, this gray line. The straight gray line is 15 million acre feet. The compact was signed in 1922 at one of the highest points in the flow of the river. So some people make excuses for our folks who negotiated the compact and said, well, they thought there was way more water. I think there were a number of hydrologists even then who were warning the politicians that they didn't have that kind of water availability. Oddly enough, the politicians didn't listen to the scientists. So there's a high point in use, and that gray line that's variable is the 10-year running average. That 10-year running average over here, you can see is dipping way down, right? So since 2000, it's been way below 15 million acre feet. Therein lies our problem, right? We're using 16 to 17.5 million acre feet of water in a river that barely produces over 15 million acres. So, it is a significant structural problem. Just to kind of let you know where everything sits in the basin. Up here, we have different reservoirs, right? This is Navajo, that's Blue Mesa. Up there is Flaming Gorge, and above it is Fontenelle. This is Lake Powell, approximate location, right? And then Lake Mead. And Amy talked about those interim operating guidelines that were negotiated in 07. And those come out of an act that was passed by Congress in 1968 with the support of our state, Wayne Eskimo. And that act authorized the Central Arizona project to occur. And in that it said, there's a section of the law that says these reservoirs have to be operated in a balancing manner. They have to be equalized or balanced. And so Lake Powell, being above Lake Mead, gets the water that comes out of the upper basin. We hold it. It's designed and was built as our savings account. So during wet years, we store a lot of water. During dry years, we drain it out. And it's worked really well over the last 19 years in drought. But we drain it. Last year, it was down to about 37% full. Right now, this is a current graph, it's 54% full. Lake Mead still sits down here at about 39% full. And the concern is that what's going on, as I discussed earlier, is there's overuse going on in the lower basin, using more water than they're entitled to. When they continue to use more water and they drain Lake Mead, the rules regarding balancing the two reservoirs require us to release more water out of Lake Powell. So it's a system where you end up, one drains and the other one eventually drains after. If Lake Powell gets up to that red line, we'll be in another situation where it's called an equalization year. So we'll drain a whole bunch of water out of Lake Powell down into Lake Mead because they used more than they were supposed to. So it doesn't seem fair, it doesn't seem right. It has to do with political power. It has to do with the number of people in the lower basin and what we have relative to them up here. But nonetheless, we have an opportunity with our state leading the charge to renegotiate these interim operating guidelines. It's something that our district is very focused on. We spent a lot of time and effort modeling the river and understanding the different ways these games are played by the lower basin so that we can help inform our state and their representatives to protect our interests here in western Colorado. It's why we end up, or I end up, I should say, talking to a lot of scientists, a lot of engineers, a lot of modelers, mathematicians, and it is really critical to understand that things much larger than what's happening right here in western Colorado affects our water supply. If there is a point in the river, well, let me just keep talking. So Lake Powell, we talked about it a little bit. Today it's sitting up here again at about 54% full, which is better than where it was back in 05, better than where it was at the end of last year or this year last time. Frankly, you're all very familiar. I was down here last week during the fourth season. I should say down here. I was over by Lone Home Mountain. Hunted there for 10 years, and I don't know that I've ever seen it as dry over there as it was this year. And it is dry down here. Hopefully this next storm will bring some in. We don't know what, maybe the weather folks will be able to tell us we're going to have a great year. I couldn't tell you that. But it is something that we need to keep in mind as we move forward. And I think, so Lake Powell, our savings account is slightly above half full. It's not where I like to keep my savings account. So we need to work on that. Well, again, how did we get here? Number one issue is the lower basin overuse. It's something we as a state and as the upper basin have to continue to hammer. We will. Sometimes, not being part of the state government, but being a regional government, I can be a little louder than our state because they want to be more diplomatic on the river. This is something that has to be fixed. And there are all sorts of innovative ways they can save water, and they need to do it. Up here, we have an issue, and we have to acknowledge that. So this is a temperature change between 1895 and 2018. And this information comes from NOAA, National Oceanic Atmospheric Agency. These are spots, the dark red spots, are spots in the United States that have changed in temperature. And really, let me put it in context. Everybody has heard about this Paris Climate Accord. And in that, those nations got together and said, hey, we want to keep the temperature change in the next 30 years under 2 degrees Celsius. Well, 2 degrees Celsius is 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. So in Fahrenheit terms, they want that temperature change to stay at 3.6 degrees. Well, it's important to understand what's actually happened in certain parts of the United States, including right here in our district, in the last 100 years. And what that means for our water supply and what it means for all of us who live here. So you'll notice, unfortunately, the biggest, darkest red spot is right over the Colorado River District. Okay? So to zoom in on that a little bit, in those 100 years, according to NOAA, Moffett County has changed 3.9 degrees Fahrenheit. Rio Blanco, 4.3. Mesa, 4.2. Delta, 3.9. Montrose, 4.3 degree change. So above whatever those folks in Paris thought was a good idea already. Uray County, 4.2. And then down into the Southwest District, 3.9. I do want to point out while we're looking at this map, Sue was kind enough to say we represented the whole West Slope. I want to say that Frank Kugel is somewhere in the room and cringed as soon as I said it, or she said it. Frank represents the Southwestern Water Conservation District based in Durango. Part of their district is Western Montrose County. They are our sister agency, so we split Montrose County in half in different drainages. So we're in the Uncompahgre and he's over in the San Miguel and Juarez. This is the Southwest District. That's our district, the River District. Together, we represent the entire West Slope. And we work very closely with Frank and his board of directors and his folks over there. But the key for us to realize is that we've already seen temperature changes. What does that mean for the flows in our river? Well, there's been some recent science coming out of NASA it's the Western Water Assessment Team, and it's NOAA and NASA and a number of other federal agencies. And they have indicated that there is a 3 to 4% decline in river flows for every 1 degree Fahrenheit change in temperature. So 3 to 4% decline in the river flow. That impacts our ag, it impacts our recreation, it impacts our cities, it impacts every one of us. So what's causing that, right? And again, I'm not going to get partisan or political. I want to talk about the causes of warming, but I want to talk about what's actually happening on the ground and how it impacts us. And I think understanding this so that you can understand why we're concerned about the warming trend and why we're planning for this to be our future is important. The fall and spring precipitation, it's falling as rain, so the snow, there's a less efficient runoff. It doesn't wait till we need it in the spring anymore. It's coming out earlier. Sublimation, apparently someone had to look that up. It's when snow, solid, turns to a gas without ever turning to liquid. So it evaporates right out of the snow. Earlier snow melt, right? That's less efficient. We get the dust from some of the drier areas in Arizona blowing in here. We get soils exposed to an earlier melt out, which means more evaporation out of the soil, so drier soil. That's what I saw, by the way, over on Lone Cone Mountain when I was walking around. Cracks in the ground, and you've all seen it. It's dry. And then, our vegetation has a longer growing season. Many of you who have been here recognize that our growing seasons have grown. That's great because we can grow more agricultural products. Our freezes are coming a little later. But it consumes more water. And it's not just ag, it's our riparian vegetation, it's our mountain vegetation. We're actually seeing less water in the river because of that issue. So, I bring this up to say, we've got an issue up here too, and it causes, as we know here in the Uncompahgre Valley, there are already water shortages without dealing with this lower basin overuse. There are years where many of you are curtailed whether you're under the project or you have decreed water rights. We see those curtailments already occurring. What we're seeing is that if the scientists are right and we continue to have warming, we can expect to see more of that. And we can expect to see earlier curtailments, longer curtailments, lower allotments in the UVWA project. So something to think about and plan on. The lower basin, and I want to touch on what they're doing, and Amy really covered it. And one thing I would add is that their willingness and voluntariness to put water back in Lake Mead or leave it in Lake Mead, it depends upon the level of the lake, right? So at the lowest levels of Lake Mead, when they almost drained it where they can't get any more water out, they are saving under their new agreement about 1.1 to 1.3 million acre feet. Well, that's about how much they are overusing through that structural deficit, right? So that's good. They fix it, but they only do that when the lake is at its lowest levels. So when it's a little bit higher, like it is right now, just a little bit, they're only putting a couple 100,000 acre feet, or leaving those in there. They're only saving a couple 100,000. So what they're doing by keeping Lake Mead low is potentially driving more water out of Lake Powell to be called down into Lake Mead. That means that we're likely to stay in this perpetual state of crisis, if you will. So from my perspective, the lower basin has a long way to go. It's a good first step, but they need to be saving 1.1 to 1.3 million acre feet every year and leaving it in that lake so that Lake Powell isn't continually drawn down. Up here, and I think Amy talked quite a bit about this, what are we doing? The River District and others are very involved in cloud seeding. There's a reservoir reoperation agreement that came out of those the drought contingency planning documents. And then there's that thing called demand management, right? That's asking everybody in this room to consider reducing their use of water. And that's frankly a lot different than most of us learned growing up, that we were supposed to reduce our use of water for some reason. It's a little unnatural. Well, what is the River District doing to help protect West Slope in these situations? We're doing a risk study with Southwest and some other groups. The risk study is really doing this modeling and understanding if we just let the system go, if we don't engage in demand management, or we aren't successful in getting better operating guidelines on those reservoirs, what is the risk that will occur to the upper basin in terms of being called out by that senior right down in the lower basin? What's that risk look like? So we've done a whole bunch of modeling. I'm not going to go into that right now, but if anybody's interested, we have reports on that. We're in phase 3 of that right now. It's really amazing. I will say the one takeaway I have is that there's not a basin on the West Slope that's not at risk of losing water if we just sit back and let a curtailment come our way. Now, as Amy says, we've never had a curtailment. Right now, because of the way those operating guidelines work, we delivered 92 million acre feet on that running 10-year average. We only have to deliver, and this is where the lawyers start arguing, 75 million acre feet or 82.3 million acre feet, but we're way up here at 92 million acre feet because of an equalization year back in 2011. Well, next year's 2021. Not next, but coming up is 2021 when that year falls off the 10-year running average. So all of a sudden our average will be closer to about 82.3 million acre feet. Then what happens, right? We get closer and closer. Now, our risk analysis says we can probably deliver on the current operating guidelines 7.5 million acre feet year in and year out without running a risk. But if we have to deliver the Mexican treaty obligation, half of it, we're at some significant risk of having problems 10 or 20 years out. And that's part of our job is to look out that far to make sure that you have water not only this year, but that your kids and grandkids have water 20 or 30 years from now, or 50 years from now. We're also doing a secondary economic impact study through something we call the Water Bank Work Group. So the Uncompahgre Valley water users and the Upper Gunnison water users just joined that group recently to help us. What we're looking at is that if our state moves forward with demand management, what would the economic impact be? Not just to the growers and the producers, but to the Main Street businesses, to the seed companies, to the Montrose Co-op. What would happen to the economy in those areas? So we've got some very talented economists looking at it, engaging with stakeholders throughout the basin, trying to figure that out. The other thing that we're looking at doing, and we're just starting up, is a West Slope oriented stakeholder group. So I applaud the CWCD for those work groups that Amy was talking about. I'm on the law and policy group. We have probably 6 or 7 employees at the River District who are on other groups, and we're very actively engaged in those issues. But what we think is missing is working through these issues with actual growers, actual producers, our utilities, our industry on the West Slope, find out what, if any, type of market might actually benefit our producers. Because it's going to be very different on the West Slope as to how we engage in demand management than it is on the Front Range. Front Range, they take a whole lot of water. They take over 600,000 acre feet of water a year over to the Front Range. 100% depleted out of the river, right? They take it primarily out of the main stem of the Colorado. Luckily, the Gunnison was successful in fighting those diversions. So we look at that and say, well, so from their perspective on the Front Range, it's a matter of turning down any number of those 7 or 8 major taps, if you view them that way, turning them down a little bit and sending more water down to Lake Powell. That's easy, 7 or 8 taps, 6, 7, whatever it is. Over here, we've got 7, 8, 10,000 different ditches, water rights. They're your individual property rights. It's really important that people who use the water on the West Slope actually get a voice in how that market, if that market's even going to be set up, what rules and process needs to happen to make it work for our communities. So we're looking at that. Just a couple other things. We're doing a whole lot of on-farm and off-farm efficiency work. Dave Kantor is here from the River District. He's very involved as one of our chief engineers up in this basin here in Uncompahgre and in the North Fork. in finding creative ways to bring federal, state, and local money together to pipe and line ditches to make it those systems that need repair to make them more efficient, hopefully less labor intensive, so that our producers can stay in business. We do a lot of that work. He's found very creative ways to bring federal money in. We advocate for the protection. We're all over the place. We are over in Denver. In fact, I know we're doing our job when I'm over meeting with legislators on the Front Range, and they say, well, I hadn't met you before. And then they say, I heard you were a real jerk. It's good. I appreciate that. And then we're also representing West Slope interests statewide. This is a CWCD meeting that happened in Leadville, and we were there pushing for process to be open and public and really get engaged with these stakeholders. So we do a lot of work throughout the basin, throughout the state, but that's who we are. That's what's going on the river. I welcome your questions now or later. I think I'm also on the panel, so hopefully that was informative.
Any questions for Andy? What is being done for phreatophyte management?
That's a great question. So phreatophyte, it's one of those scientific terms. Plants that grow in riparian areas primarily and suck a whole lot of water out of the river system. Natural phreatophytes occur, willows and others are natural in the system. There are invasive phreatophytes that some science shows that they use more water than the natives. We have been engaged, and the state has been engaged in non-native phreatophyte removal. I will say that as of recently, we're doing less of that phreatophyte removal because the science seems to indicate that there's not a huge difference between what a willow sucks up and what a tamarisk community sucks up. And we're looking at that very closely. I actually have one of our water resource specialists looking at that issue right now because we're really trying to get to the bottom of the current science on that. But that's, we have in the past done a lot of work on it. I just want to make sure that when we're spending money, taxpayer money, that we're doing it on something that actually matters.
Other questions? All right. Can you hear me? Thank you. I never used to be a man.
It happens to all of us.
When that transition happened, I was kind of upset about it. Okay. Can you please address the potential impacts of POW and/or mead dropping below critical pool levels, i.e. hydropower, Las Vegas, recovery dollars?
Sure. I think that's a great question. So there's a lot of discussion and identification in the drought contingency plan and documents and discussions about levels in Lake Powell, and we'll look at that first. What we do to protect those. So at certain levels of Lake Powell, our turbines that turn in the Bureau of Reclamation turbines will turn off. And as the reservoir drops even before it hits that critical level, they make less power. And in fact, last year they were at about a 75% capacity in power generation. So Western Area Power Administration, which has offices here, is the entity, the federal entity that takes the power the Bureau creates at Lake Powell and puts it on the grid and distributes it to local co-ops, right? So many of our West Slope co-ops buy their power from WAPA, and it's power coming out of Lake Powell and some of the other generating stations on these major reservoirs on the Colorado River system. I want to be real clear, in the compact and every agreement since, power is secondary. It's a secondary use to our primary purpose, which is preserving Colorado and upper basin consumptive use of water. The power entities, the stakeholders, would like to see that reversed. They'd like us to make sure that the power pool never suffers. Now, I'm not opposed to that, but I don't want that to happen at the expense of Western Slope ability to use and consume water, or frankly, anyone in Colorado's ability to use and consume water. So we are working with the Bureau and WAPA and others to look at how they can continue to provide power if that power pool drops, right? So right now, or I should say last year, it was about 90 feet above kind of the critical point where Lake Powell starts to have problems generating power. Given the fact that last year alone, Powell dropped over 30 feet, that 90 feet buffer isn't a real comforting one. But it's an issue for us. I will say that as you get below the power production level, so the level that is in the drought contingency documents, we talk about 3525, that's 3,525 feet above mean sea level, and protecting that with the reservoir reoperations. Now, demand management, to the extent it produces water, that program is designed to protect compact compliance, not power flow. So that 3525 level will be protected by moving water primarily out of Flaming Gorge down into Powell. A couple million acre feet that can be moved that way. If that happens in a long-term drought, that's not a solution for protecting the power. So the question for us is, what can WAPA and the Bureau do to potentially replace that hydropower if we see times in the future where that reservoir has to drop in order to protect the upper basin? So that's, I would say that's kind of what's going on. I would say that there are points in the reservoir below minimum power. Minimum power is 3490. Below that, we start running into trouble delivering our 7.5 million acre feet downstream. So at one point, there will become a significant problem if the hydrology stays bad. Down in Powell, or down in Meade, it's really interesting. The current lowest elevation intake for the Las Vegas City of Las Vegas, Southern Nevada Water Authority's intake is at about 1,000 feet mean sea level, and the reservoir is within 100 feet of that. So they saw this coming. They had a lot of people and frankly a lot of money. They drilled a $4 billion tunnel underneath Lake Meade, and they came up with a bathtub drain, and they're currently putting in a pump so they can continue to pump it dry because they didn't want to see their city go dry, right? So what happens is Las Vegas and Nevada is junior to many of the rights in California, but if you drop Lake Meade below the outtakes and they can't get water down to California, Las Vegas will still be able to take water out of their bathtub, at least physically. Now, there'll be a whole lot of litigation about what they're doing here, but that's, so they did that. They did that primarily without federal assistance because they wanted to act in their own interest. So I hope that answers your question on this.
Well, now I'm really mad. I mean, I've been worried every time I think about water, I think about Las Vegas and how fast it's growing. And I see you have that question. Okay, not about me. I'll get off my soapbox. What plans are being made to increase the infrastructure to store water on the western slope?
That's a great question, and I think I want to tie this question in, if I can, into the whole effect of temperature change on the flow of the rivers. In 2018, you'll recall stream flows, natural stream flows in many of our rivers dropped way low. The temperature spiked. The fish in the recreation economy that depends on it. Many of our diversions for ag uses were unable to divert water out of them. And in places where we operated reservoirs that have water interests, we were able to reoperate those reservoirs and get cooperation from parties. And I'll take, for instance, the Root Eye Reservoir that sits up the triangle. We own a significant amount of water in that that we purchased from the federal government that owns the reservoir. We were able to get Exxon, the city of Aspen, the city of Salt, Carbondale, Rifle, Glenwood Springs to donate water to the river and allow it to be released. And so you saw the temperature spiking in those rivers. You saw fish populations at potential risks. You saw we have these endangered fish, as many of you know, down in the lower Colorado River. And we saw those critical levels being reached where those fish populations might have a significant die-off. We were able to deliver the water down to the Grand Valley to a power plant down there, and then much of it was used to finish the crops in the Grand Valley, And a lot of it was used to help the fish population stay alive. And so, in times of rising temperatures and lower precipitation, reservoirs are absolutely critical, right? We have places like the Upper Padre in Erie County that oftentimes during these high temperature drought years don't have enough water for their river systems. I think the Upper Padre is a great example where they're studying an augmentation system and some conjunctive use reservoirs where it would help the ag, the municipal, and the river levels up there. It's those kind of things that I believe are essential for the future of our rivers. Now, I don't believe that we will ever see, and I think there are probably good reasons not, huge reservoirs being built like Blue Mesa or Lake Powell. I would say, first of all, because if you look at Lake Powell, if we're taking it up here, Lake Powell's just that much more empty, right? So it's a matter of strategically placing buckets around the west slope to enable us to use water better and retime it to frankly mitigate what's going on with the temperature. That takes money, it takes leadership, it takes a lot of work in today's environment. I think there are, let me just finish by saying there are just a few current reservoir projects that are working their way through the system. There's one up on the White River. Not surprisingly, it is a fairly large reservoir. At its largest size, it's about the size of the Ridgeway Reservoir. They're getting an awful lot of flack from folks. Our district has provided engineering and legal support and some money. The state has provided some money to study it, but that's a pretty controversial project, just from some people's perspective.
Does that answer your question, Don? Okay, great. The next question is, you said every basin would be affected by a compact haul. Whose junior water would be cut off first? Madison Basin only has 10% post-compact. Why would the 90% senior water rights, why would the 90% senior water rights want to give up those to protect the front range? I knew you were going to give up the front range.
Well, I might say, in the event, maybe Bob Herford should go up since he's our vision engineer. He's got it all figured out how he's going to administer it. And that's the answer the state's going to get every time. They don't have it figured out yet, how they would curtail water rights. They've looked at it, we're looking at it. Theoretically, right, not theoretically, actually, legally, we have the prior appropriation system embedded in our Constitution. And so many of our ag rights are senior to the municipal rights. That's true here on our west slope. Many of our water providers have junior water rights, and I say junior, they're junior to the compact. So what the compact says, has some language in there that says prior perfected rights shall not be impacted by this agreement. Our position in the Upper Basin is that prior perfected language means our pre-1922 or pre-1929 water rights can't be turned off. Lower Basin doesn't agree with that. There's some interesting history in why that language ended up in Article 8 of the Colorado River Compact. They have an argument. We think ours is better. I think, as Amy said, we don't want to give it to the Supreme Court because God only knows what they're going to decide. But that's the issue. So there, of those, I mentioned 600,000 acre feet of water that are coming out of the Colorado River every year to go over the Front Range. About 3% of that is pre-compact. The rest of it's post. So if we go ahead into a curtailment, and our state engineer says, well, we've got to curtail all post-compact water rights. And our risk study really analyzes what that looks like in each basin. But just take that Colorado mainstem. If you turn off the city of Denver's water, it's 60% of their waters. It's 70% of Colorado Springs waters. It's a huge portion of Greeley and Fort Collins and Thornton and all of those cities throughout the Front Range depend upon the Colorado River. To think that the state engineer or the judiciary, who's going to have to back them up, are just going to turn off those spigots and let those fire hydrants go dry and let their tip taps go dry, it's not going to happen. Now, will they impose outdoor watering restrictions? Will they do other things like that? Yes, but that water's got to come from somewhere. And if in fact we're right that our prior perfected rights, our pre-22 rights are immune from the compact, the logical thing, and I've heard Denver Water Jim Lockett, the CEO, say, yeah, if we get to that point where we think that a compact call is likely, we will come over and acquire pre-compact water to protect our critical uses in our cities. Well, the reality is, so will our water providers on the West Slope who provide domestic water. Because we have to have water to drink, that's just the bottom line. So it is in our interest, for those of us who advocate for agricultural water use, and for those of you who use it, to make sure we never get there. And that's really why we're even looking at this demand management issue, that's why we're talking about it, is if we can provide a pool of water that's separate from what's naturally in Lake Powell, it doesn't get sucked down in that balancing, and it sits in Lake Powell, and we can use it to protect, when we need to, ourselves from a compact call, it's worth looking at. I'm sure that we're in favor of it. I have, frankly, my board members, Mark Kaplan among them, are really skeptical of the idea, and I don't blame them. So we're looking at it, but we're also recognizing that we may need to do it.
Okay, we have a weather question. You talked about our dry fall, but didn't mention our wet winter and spring, and what did that do to Lake Powell? You mentioned climate change, but didn't mention weather modification. Ground to sky, sky to ground, all targeted areas. What did that do to the weather?
Sure. I can, that was a multifaceted question there, Steve.
Hey, I'm not the question.
I did mention our wet winter. Our wet winter boosted Lake Powell by about 30 feet. It was great. And it was about 130% snowpack at the peak, right? That's what really matters, not what it is in June when you're comparing averages. It matters what the peak snowpack is. So 130%. Well, 30% above average is not tremendous. Let's just call it what it is. It was a good year. It wasn't a great year. Of that, because the soil moisture, even though we had a really wet and it felt like we were back in the 90s or even the 80s, and this spring, it's wet, cold spring, so the snow stuck around longer. Of that, only about 118% above average made it into Lake Powell because the soil sucked up so much of that water. So even with that, we saw a 30-foot rise in Powell. That was good. We need at least 8 more of those in a row to get Powell back to full. So let's just keep thinking that it's going to happen. Weather modification, cloud seeding. Talked about it a little bit, but we do have again, Dave Kander, who's here, runs our involvement in the River District in cloud seeding program. Southwest has a cloud seeding program. There's activities in Gunnison, Upper Gunnison. What we know about cloud seeding is that it can add 5 to 15% moisture in certain storm events. The storm has to be just right, coming in from the right angle, at the right temperature, with the right amount of moisture, at a time where we can hit it with, primarily we run in our state ground-based cloud seeding. So we know that we can add that. What we don't know is how much water in total. What matters to me, how many acre feet make it into the river and into our ditches and into our reservoirs. So that's science that we still have to work on. It's cheap, relatively speaking, compared to building reservoirs, so it's not a bad idea at all. If you shoot silver iodide crystals up into the clouds when they're there, just want to point out this fall, not much cloud seeding. There's snowmaking going on at our ski areas. There's not cloud seeding because that requires clouds, right? So haven't seen many of those recently down here. That's something really critical to know. And like 2018, cloud seeding didn't do much because there weren't clouds. Grand Mesa, City of Grand Junction and the other water providers have a huge program up on the Mesa. Last year, they think they produced and added about 20% to their snowpack up there. They think. Can't really tell because it's hard to measure. 2018, there was barely any extra snow from cloud seeding.
Okay, these are a little upper-lower basin discussions. What leverage do you have to reduce lower basin overuse? Seems like upper basin's being forced to find a solution to correct overuse of lower basin.
Yeah, the leverage gets tricky. The question in any negotiation is what can we offer them to bring about. I think and this probably comes from my legal career, I think that the the lower basin is probably going to have to believe that the upper basin is willing to take these issues to court and enforce the compact the way it was written. That, as you've heard today, is a scary thought for a lot of us, but frankly, sometimes you do have to go to court to protect those rights, and certainly the lower basin needs to understand that's a risk. The other part of it, though, is that over the last, I'd say since 2005, when the last critical there was a building distrust and real fight on the river between the lower basin and the upper basin. Since that time, there have been a whole lot of really good collaborative solutions. And the lower basin, even though I'm the first one to harp on them, have cut back their water use. How do we get them to realize they have to continue to cut back their water use in a permanent manner? And I think a lot of that has to do with things that our district does, which is bringing the lower basin folks up here to understand the values and the importance of our economy and our location. It's us going out there and talking to them. It's establishing and trying to get rid of some of the us versus them mentality and realize that it is really one river system and how you actually get it to work, and that activities, I'll pick on Arizona for a minute. As they saw the system crashing, they are the junior on the lower basin system, so they, without any kind of additional agreements, are likely to get cut off first. They saw it coming, they knew they were at risk, and so they started pumping 300 to 500,000 additional acre feet a year through the Central Arizona project, which they were dumping into groundwater, into their, through gravel infiltration into groundwater reservoirs. Because they thought, well, we need to hoard it while we can before we get cut off, so we can then pump it out of the ground and use it. Well, then when they pump it, they might be able to use about 70% of what they put in. It's going to be a lot worse quality. It's going to have huge dissolved solids and salts. It's not a good situation. But we set up a system, because they're the junior, that they were forced to hoard that resource, right? It's what I think they say in the academic world, a tragedy of the commons. It's when everybody gets their cattle. That's what happened before the Taylor Grazing Act out here. You race to put more cattle on the ground, you race to use more water. So some of what we have to recognize is how do we get rid of that system where they're at risk of losing their entire water supply for the city of Phoenix and the city of Scottsdale. That's honestly some of the stuff we all have to help solve that problem.
So does anybody in all this address growth, and is that at all addressed?
Yeah, growth is addressed. Growth is a driving factor. I will say that we have pushed the Front Range as they come over for expanding some of their diversions into greater conservation. We've seen the city of Denver do some tremendous things. I'm not usually one to compliment them, but let's really look at this. In 1995, they used the same amount of water they do today, and in that same period of time, they added 1 million people in their service area. And that was through conservation measures that they've imposed. I think they can do a lot better. In fact, to your nemesis there, Southern Nevada Water Authority in Las Vegas, they've got one of the most efficient water systems around. They have paid people to rip out sod and change their outdoor landscaping. They are very aggressive in doing it. They today have one of the lowest water uses per capita of any city in America. And those Bellagio fountains, I just want to warn you next time you're there, those are gray water. So when you're sitting there and the wind blows and it smacks you in the face, just think about that. But they actually, it doesn't appear that way. They do a really good job of looking opulent, but they actually do a good job. The question is just, should they be living in a desert?
Right. Well, that's a bigger question. And it's really, in order to make this, to move this dialogue forward in a humane way, we have to understand what they're doing too. So it takes both sides, and I think that's the part that where it's true collaboration, trying to understand what their issues are.
It is, and along those lines, I want to mention land use is an important issue, not just in the lower basin, up here, right? I've talked to the Montrose County Commissioners and others about land use issues, and I'll be honest, I grew up in Ohio. Ohio, it rains. I grew up with sod all over the place, right? Golf courses. I don't live in Ohio. The idea that I have the luxury to have 2 acres of sod, it should not come as a natural right to any of us, because when you approve subdivisions with acres and acres of sod, it will impact our ability to produce food on our farms. Because going back to those critical uses and who pays for that additional water use, it is always the agricultural sector that pays for water use. It may, and so the idea is, how do our county commissioners, our cities, provide incentives to developers to use less water in their developments? I'm not talking about violating their private property rights at all. I spent my legal career fighting for private property rights. Talking about being smart and designing systems that provide incentives to use less water in our development. There's all sorts of good science, great codes that have been designed as model codes that we can all enact here in Western Colorado. Frankly, I go over and I push it on the Front Range all the time. And we need to see that happen at a local level, statewide. So would encourage everyone in this room to think about that as you think about potentially carving off acreage to develop or accommodating growth in this area. How do you use less water doing that?
And just to piggyback off that, I just wanted you all to know that the commissioners, as well as the county commissioners from Uray, county commissioners from Delta County, Mike Berry from Tri-County Water, Aaron Clay, where I saw him come in somewhere, and a number of you were on a land and water committee, pretty newly formed, to discuss what options do we have at the county, what can we do to educate folks on best water uses, best land uses, and then develop policy between the city and the counties and other counties to understand how we can make better decisions with regard to those things. So we're just in the beginning stages of that, but those of you who are interested in this, it's important for you to know that we're looking at that. So, and Steve Anderson also on that committee. A lot of us here are on that committee. So sorry, I just wanted to let you know what the county, since you kind of keep looking at the county commissioners over here.
It's not a mean look, so
Yeah, okay. So why is the Front Range not increasing their storage capacity? Cache La Puder storage dam not being done near Fort Collins?
What we call the Northern Integrated Supply Project. Let me just say, when it first was put on the books, they had a connection in that reservoir to the Colorado Big Thompson system, and they were going to help fill that reservoir on the Poudre River with Colorado River water. And so, frankly, our district came out swinging and said, no way, no how, shouldn't get. We were in their federal permitting process, we were in their state permitting process. We were a significant pain to them. We negotiated with them for a long time, got them to drop the connection to the Colorado River. We have now come out in support of that reservoir construction. They, however, have pending lawsuits from some environmental groups about what they're going to do to the Poudre River and the environment. I frankly think, in looking at it very closely, that they've done an amazing job of balancing the human use and the environmental uses. They've agreed to all sorts of retiming of water that helps, similar to what I was just describing that we did in 2018. They're doing a lot of that on that system. I think they need to develop that reservoir. And the Gross Reservoir is another one. Denver is trying to expand a reservoir in Boulder County that gets filled with water out of the Moffett tunnel system that comes from the Fraser River, which is a tributary up in Grand County, right in the Winter Park. We fought with that. We litigated. We negotiated. We got some really tremendous benefits for the entire West Slope out of that negotiation. We ended up agreeing that they should do their relatively modest expansion. Even Grand County commissioners came out in favor of it, right? So then they go over to Boulder County and say, hey, we want to build this reservoir or expand our reservoir. And Boulder County commissioners said, no, not so fast. You got to go through this local land use process called 1041 permit. So the city of Denver and the county of Boulder are now locked horns in litigation. And they're fighting tooth and nail over this, and they're not building a reservoir, which oddly enough has the impact on the West Slope of holding up a bunch of environmental benefits that we need done in the Upper Fraser and the Upper Colorado River and even the Eagle River, which are some additional benefits. So it is a very complex world that we're operating in the river system.
And a final question, what is the consequence, and I have my holster with my fake gun up here if you want it, what is the consequence of those who continue to drain Lake Mead to critical levels?
Well, I think the consequence is that they themselves will not have water for their own uses. And so there's a lot of incentive for the lower basin to actually continue on the path they're on, which is greater conservation of water. They do recognize that their overuse is putting themselves at risk, but it's also putting us at risk. And so the question in terms of consequences, honestly, it depends in large part upon what the court system will or will not do to help protect us.
Okay, and this goes a little bit off the rail here, but does any of the DD money affect you? And do you know what they might be using those funds for?
So Proposition DD, many of you probably saw it in the paper. It passed statewide, not in this county and not in many counties in the River District, in the early November elections. Proposition DD was legalizing sports betting at our existing authorized casino locations and online through those casino locations. The revenue, the 10% tax was imposed on that through Proposition DD, goes to pay some administrative costs of that program, some gambler anonymous type things, and then the vast majority of it goes to fund the Colorado water plant, right? So we have a water plant in the state, and I heard someone earlier criticize it. I would say this about the water plant. I think that it does a good job of balancing interests, both urban and rural, agricultural, municipal, and recreation. It's not perfect. And the bottom line is, as we continue to have additional people, and we continue to see our supplies dwindle due to temperature changes, we will have shortages of water. And right now, without a water plan, I would say, the default, I would say it's still the default when you talk to certain municipalities, the default is to go buy ag water. And so we don't want to see that. We want more innovation, more conservation of water, better, as we were just talking about, land use. So all of those things are in the water plan. It requires money to do most of those things. And so how you do that, you've got to do it, and you've got to have voices like your county and the River District at the State House and at CWCD meetings where that money is allocated, at your roundtables, right, to make sure that water under the water plan gets spent on things that are good for all of us, right? And so just like going back to, are there reservoirs that are good? I believe so. I don't expect everybody to agree with me. Are there reservoirs that probably shouldn't be built? Yes. We have to define and understand what they are, and then we have to get behind them as a community and make them happen. It's going to require some pretty significant state funding. Proposition DD provides that state funding, but it isn't something where you just see it approved and walk away. It's where our district kicks in, and we attend those meetings, and we push with our legislators. I have lobbyists, and I myself end up at our Capitol all the time, making sure that we're representing the West Slope and protecting our West Slope water interests. But I would say this, as long as we're talking about Proposition DD, it wasn't very popular in many of the counties on the West Slope, and I've talked to a lot of people about why. And the concern is that it's a statewide issue. The money's going to Denver, and we on the West Slope have very little control over it. I think that's true, right? We have 15% these days of the electoral body or the electorate on the West Slope. 85% of the votes are in the metropolitan Front Range, right? Just in the urban corridors. So we've got to think about that when you do statewide funding. I think our district and others have a lot of impact, but we don't control the legislature. We don't control where that money goes. So what do we need to do? Well, I'm just going to touch on it briefly. The River District is funded by Mueller, right? As I said, probably your average home in Montrose County pays about $7 a year in taxes to the River District. And I do appreciate that. But in order to help the West Slope build some of these projects, restore our rivers, build our reservoirs, we do need more money on the West Slope to do that. We can get some of that through Proposition BD, but not all of it. At the River District, our revenue is getting hit by several things. We've never been, quote, debruced, so the Tabor amendment applies. We forewent $180,000 in revenue this year from taxes because we reduced our mill levy to comply with Tabor. That's 1 year alone. We are getting hit by Gallagher, right? That's that weird one that deals with residential taxes versus commercial taxes, which I'm happy to explain to anybody in great detail, but some of you look like you might fall asleep if I do that. And then we're also getting hit in the River District with the decline in oil and gas and coal revenue, right, on the West Slope. We have some heavily producing districts or areas in our district now. Down in Nucla, that's actually in the Southwest District, but we have coal mines and power plants up in the Yampa River that are in our district, and we have gas fields in the Piceance Basin. That used to account just as recently as 2013 for about 26% of our revenue. Today it accounts for about 13% of our revenue. We predict a time, if you listen to the governor, Xcel Energy, the MEA, Holy Cross, there's a time where that revenue stream will be down to zero or close to zero, right? That's 2040 or 2050, depending on whom you're talking to. So if we're going to continue to do our job at the River District protecting the West Slope, we are going to need more revenue. So it is likely that you will hear from us at the ballot box on a West Slope water issue, not a statewide issue, possibly as soon as 2020. And I will be the first one to know and admit taxes are really bad. But I also want anybody who questions our use of tax money to come look at our books, come look at our audits, come understand how we run the district. We won an award recently, something called the Special Districts Association Award. And our Garfield County's assessor commented on a story about it. He is a very conservative Republican, and his comments were that the River District is the most efficient local government he's ever seen. And he was really impressed that we won this award. I don't know if we're the most efficient, I wouldn't say that, but I think we do a good job. If you have questions, come talk to us. And if I can do better and you've got ideas, tell me how to do better with less. So, just a statement.
Be careful, or we come tell you. Okay, so the last question before we break for lunch, and then as we move along, or as you're eating and talking to people, write down your questions because the panel will be happy to talk about that after. Finally, Aldous will speak right after lunch. So the last one, I recently traveled through Lower Arkansas Valley. Can municipalities buy ag land today as they did in the 60s and 70s?
Yeah, that's Crawley County over there. Didn't have a picture of that in this presentation. I often do, because yes, municipalities can buy water. They can buy it in voluntary transactions where the farmer or rancher exercises their own voluntary property right to sell their water. You can do that. The project water obviously is a little different down here in this valley, but your priority water can be sold most of the time very easily. There's the voluntary sales, which is really what happened in Crawley County. But if push comes to shove, that whole compact issue we were just talking about, the cities actually have in our state constitution the right of condemnation for water rights. And there have been a couple cases, oddly enough, out of the West Slope. Town of Norwood did it to someone's ditch back 60 years ago, and the city of Grand Junction did it. And so, yes, they have to pay fair market value of the water at that time, but they can take the water off of our property if they have a justifiable need to do so.
So there you go, you heard it here. So give Andy a round of applause. I think some compelling maps about the weather, the drought. I think those are all things that we ought to be paying attention to. Supporting the river district is important. What we're gonna do right after lunch, 12:30, we're gonna start back up, depending on how fast you get through the line. But food is ready. No, it's not. Forget it. Okay, so I'm gonna dance. Okay, visit with amongst yourselves. Please, we would love your feedback, and yes, whoever asked the question about the presentation being available, we'll make that available to you if you're interested. So go ahead and break, and as soon as lunch is ready, I'll make an announcement. Thank you.